presented today, but at another time. 920 Broadway, 3 East 57th Street, and 1271 Avenue of the Americas. These are being read into the record today. Okay, so the last item today is item number 19. It's an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of the Bronx. It's 558 Grand Concourse, Bronx Post Office, individual and interior landmark, docket number 165723, block 2443, lot 400, a modern style government building designed by Thomas Harlan Ellett and built in 1935-37. Application is to construct a rooftop addition, modify and create interior and exterior masonry openings, and replace and install infill, modify an exterior terrace and a loading platform, replace a canopy, and install interior and exterior signage, interior power connections, and a vestibule, and exterior stairs, light fixtures, and mechanical equipment.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Abby Hurlbut, Preservation Staff. The application is for exterior and interior alterations related to the adaptive reuse of the Bronx General Post Office, which is both an interior and an individual landmark at 558 Grand Concourse, which occupies the entire block, bounded on the west by the Grand Concourse, the north by East 150th Street, the east by Anthony J. Griffin Place, and the south by East 149th Street. There are several components of this application. The exterior component of the application includes constructing a rooftop addition on top of the existing one-story penthouse, which will include an exterior terrace over which will have a frame and a retractable canvas roof, adding metal signage at the rear of the existing penthouse, modifying masonry openings throughout the base and first floors, removing a portion of the balustrade at the southern end of the terrace and installing a new stair, extending an existing loading dock platform and canopy at the eastern facade, installing ramps and stairs at the rear facade and existing loading platform, and installing light fixtures, 2 flagpoles at the northern facade, and signage throughout the terrace and building, which will include freestanding, internally lit metal kiosks with punched letters, as well as backlit and internally lit metal letters on shelves with an integrated camera below the shelves at building entrances in the base and first floors. The interior component of the application includes removing portions of the stone-clad walls of the lobby and installing signage, sprinklers, cameras, and a vestibule. The applicants are here to talk about this in detail.
Well, nice to meet you all. Some of you are the very first time. My name is Young Woo. I'm a partner of Young & Associates. We are based in New York. We've been in business for the last 35 years, and we earn our name as innovative developers because we have done projects like Sky Garage Building and Super Pier Market and Church Art Tower. So our development concept is based on town square idea. In Europe called Piazza, and in South America called Life, which is a focal point of the community where people get together and they connect, they interact, and they share their thoughts through the music or through the event or sports or art or market happens, and which promotes local creativeness and local culture. I believe that is a fundamental of today's powerful concept of shared economy. So we'd like to translate that idea into this building. So we want to create indoor and outdoor market and retail venue for first floor and the ground floor floors. Then upper 2 floors, we like to create a personal offices that we are inspired by co-working concept and coexisting concept for small professional business people and for local commerce. And this is the picture in 1937. This building was completed in 1937, and it was built for single-purpose use, which was a public office space, postal office space, and then time has been changed. So last for 77 years, and this was very much off limit other than lobby area for the public. So now the technology has changed, time has been changed, and computer world is dictating the use of the building differently. And so currently the building is 90% vacant, and it's waiting for the change, I believe. So we are here to get your support to achieve our vision. We need better accessibility from the street and better accessibility for public to go into the building. And we like to activate the roof, which can be an old concept of town square idea. And with that, I'd like to turn to Cass and Jay to go through what kind of changes that we are looking for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Cass Stackelberg, King Space Market Partners. Good afternoon, Commissioners. As Abby described, just to put this project into context, this is very much, as you probably have imagined now, very much of an adaptive reuse project. As you probably know, the Postal Service has been deaccessioning buildings across the country now for a number of years. Statistics upward of a few thousand buildings have either been put on the market, sold, and the Bronx General Post Office is one of those buildings. And Young and his partners are now the owners of this building and are, in a way, sort of partnering with the Postal Service as well, because as part of this project, the Post Office will also have a place in this building. And Jay can take you through sort of the plans and show you where that's happening. But I think it's important to think of this in this sort of broader context of Postal Service deaccessioning and the opportunities that that brings, because these are spectacular buildings. They're grand, this scale, obviously a very grand scale. You probably know the Farley Post Office, the Philadelphia Post Office at 30th Street, these very large scale buildings, and then of course the sort of smaller rural buildings, but all very high quality, fantastic buildings. And this is an opportunity to take a building of which historically about 10% of it was open to the public and actually make the entire building accessible and useful to the community. So I wanted to sort of set that stage as part of the discussion today. We're going to take you through a bit of background, and then Jay Balgora from Studio V will take you through the design strategy and the various component parts of the design that we're bringing to you today. Some statistics on the building, they're in your packet if you'd like to study those. I'll keep going in terms of the history and the site. This here in red, this is the post office site. It's in the south portion of the borough, directly across the Harlem River from Manhattan. And one of the things that makes this building so significant, obviously historically it was in an essential location in this part of the Bronx, located on the Grand Concourse. But today, in the way Young is thinking about this project, this building is really uniquely situated right here with fantastic public transportation, subway stopping right here, the hub, which is really an essential commercial area right here, Lincoln Hospital directly down 149th Street, Hostess Community College, other schools, shopping areas, Yankee Stadium just to the north. So this is a really essential sort of intersection at the corner of Grand Concourse and 149th Street. And the idea is to make this building a bit more permeable so that it can actually be accessed on all four sides by the community. Some photographs of the building today. This is, we've got a key plan up here so you can sort of reference where you are. North is to the left, the Grand Concourse is here. This is the northern side of the Grand Concourse facade of the building, the primary facade. This is the main entry to the postal lobby. The postal lobby was designated as an interior landmark in 2013. The building itself was designated an individual landmark in 1976. Another view of the exterior of the building on the concourse side. We'll talk a bit about the integration of art and sculpture with architecture as a sort of key component of this building. But you can see these two primary sculpture groups, Noah here and the letter here on either side, flanking the main entry to the building. This is the 150th Street side, so along this side. And a couple things to point out, particularly in this photo, I think it shows a bit more clearly. The exterior of the building, while in very good condition, has been altered over time. So there was a large campaign of brick replacement, presumably to repair the underlying steel. So you see this lighter gray here at the corners, at all four corners, and then running around these arches. That's all replacement brick. So what had been a very sort of monolithic, really beautiful iron spot brick now, obviously this project was done with some care and some thought. But it's slightly changed the architectural reading of the building. But I did want to point out that this and then these arches, this is all replacement brick. These double height windows as well were replaced about 10 years ago. They were historically steel windows and are aluminum windows. They're a little beefy, but actually they carry for the organization and some of the detailing of the historic. There is post office signage, these large sort of bulky kiosks on the corners, and we have a signage program that really intends to sort of open up views and not interfere with the primary corners of the building. And then also, just to point out, it was hard to see in the other photos, but the way the building is organized, there's a very large sort of blocky mast, and it's set off by this plinth that wraps around the north, the west, and the south side. So here in plan, there's a plinth that wraps here on 150th across the Grand Concourse, and then up here on 149th Street. So that's about 20 feet in depth. And this is sort of unused space right now. And as part of the program, we actually plan to activate that space as well. But I do want to sort of point that out because it's relevant in the way one reads the building. The eastern end of the 150th Street side, so you get a sense of the depth of this plinth. The base of the building is clad entirely in granite with this really simplified sort of classical, modern classical balustrade, and then window openings with simple iron grills and louvers and things like that, sort of service-related things punched into the base. The back of the building, as it is today on A.J. Griffin Place, this is this narrow street that really is sort of not open. It's open to traffic, but it's not used except for access to the post office. There's a loading dock here with a canopy, and this has always served as the sort of vehicular loading for the mail. This overpass where this photograph is taken looks down a deep ravine into the Metro North cut. So this building is sort of situated on this steep grade which runs down from the Grand Concourse to the east and then overlooks a train yard basically off to the east. But you get a sense of the back of the building with the loading and then this tall double height bulkhead that houses mechanical equipment and elevators. And then this is this penthouse that was mentioned before. This is original to the building. It's a one-story element that sets back from this main volume of the building. The 149th Street side, you get a sense of this steep grade going from Grand Concourse down to A.J. Griffin Place. And you can see the offset, these windows, these paired windows in elevation align with these three openings, but because of perspective, you don't actually read them, you don't read them that way. Obviously, the Grand Concourse is an essential element of this part of the Bronx. It spurred tremendous development, was opened in 1909, soon after the subway actually got to the Bronx in 1904. You can see Yankee Stadium here. The post office is located just down here with Manhattan Beyond. And this building, as I said, sits prominently on the concourse at 149th Street. Historical photograph of the building. You see this modern classical detailing constructed from 1935 to 1937. And again, this notion of, during this period of architecture, in particular, so this WPA period, the integration of architecture with sculpture and painting as being a really sort of integral trio. This building clearly illustrates that on the exterior as well as within the postal lobby. Some details of the sculpture groups flanking the main entry and some of this really beautiful sort of abstracted garlands and classical detailing that you see around the base of the plinth. The postal lobby, as I said, is a designated interior landmark. This is a photo from about 1938, prior to the completion of these murals that Ben Shawn and Bernard Bryson completed in 1939. But I believe this illustrates sort of the condition when it was open to the public. The murals were finished a couple of years after the lobby was open, and you see these beautiful pendant light fixtures, which fortunately remain today and will be restored as part of the project. This coffered ceiling, these square fixtures are now gone, but will actually be restored. And then along this wall, which is the east wall, you came in from the concourse directly in. There were letter drops, service windows, and much of this has changed. We'll show you existing condition photos in a moment. But it was this sort of open space largely, and today it's been filled with kiosks and furniture and equipment for the Postal Service, which we intend to sort of take out and make this much more of an open place. I'll also just mention that the restoration of the murals is very much a part of this overall project. It's not necessarily being undertaken by Young Woo and Associates, but it is being done by the Postal Service. It is considered to be part of this overall effort of adapting the building. A view now back toward the Grand Concourse. Historically, there were these three what looked like polished brass enclosures, these vestibule enclosures, which are now gone, as are these desks and revolving doors and other equipment that have put into place. Historic plan, just to orient you, the concourse is down here at the bottom, 150th on the left, 149th on the right, and A.J. Griffin on the top. So one came in from the steps into the postal lobby, and this, as it is today, this is really the only sort of publicly accessible part of the building. There was mail sorting done at this level and the floor above. Large elevators with loading off the back of the building. Mail sorting stopped in the building, I think, about 5 years ago. So really, there is some activity back here associated with the postal lobby, but there's really very little happening in the building today. And a section just giving you a sense of sort of how the building sort of historically came together. This is the concourse elevation. There was historically a recessed light well with skylights, which had been covered over. We've actually found the interior walls here that were part of the light well. We intend to open them up on the interior, but this has all been slabbed over historically. And you see this sort of tiered effect of the base, the plinth here, the main volume here, this one-story penthouse here, and then this tall bulkhead beyond. We, of course, have been fascinated by the target range here that's called out on this early section, but haven't found any evidence of that in the bulkhead. A photo from 1980 just showing the condition of the building with these large Postal Service emblems on the side, on the concourse side. And then an article from the 1970s, which actually details some of the restoration work that was done to the murals in 1970. And then this article was written on the occasion of actually another campaign, which looks as if it actually involved perhaps putting urethane over the existing frescoes, which obviously have resulted in them being very dark now and difficult to read. So hopefully we'll be able to have all that undone as part of this project. And then an overall slide that describes the design approach that I'll have Jay take you through.
Thank you, Kaz. I'm Jay Valgora, and I'm principal with Studio B Architecture, and I'm really pleased to show this presentation to you today. There's a lot of things. I'll try to go through it pretty quickly, as I know you'll have questions at the end. So briefly, there are three overall components to the design, and the most important thing for us in the design was to try to take a light hand. When I hear people reading off a list of all the different things involved, we tried very carefully with each component to respect the building, understand the nature in which it was landmarked, where it combines this very classical form with kind of almost a modern approach to detailing and materials, almost the kind of metallic sheen of the brick, the super simplification of the sculptural details. So we tried to be respectful of that. The three primary components are the following. First, at some of the windows, as Young said from the beginning, we want to try to engage the street because the building has a tremendous presence and character, but it is somewhat, if you will, removed from the street with a large plinth. And most of the building was meant to be inaccessible. And so very carefully, and we'll show you the exact details, we're looking at trying to create some greater doorway openings onto the plinth so it can be accessible. Today there's chains closing it off from the public, and some limited openings here that we tried to maintain proportions that were sensitive to the original nature of the building. The second part, and it's quite set back, is the penthouse here, where we looked at just adding some additional windows. That was used for storage. It has very few windows, some very small punched windows. It is hardly visible. We'll show you sightline studies. We wanted to create some slightly larger windows there because we like to inhabit it with people. And then the third is we are proposing a one-story addition on the roof, tucked kind of behind that bulkhead setback, but we'd like it to be symmetrical to respect the overall character of the building and to activate the roof and allow people to go up there. So going into some of the details, on the ground floor, there is existing on the left and proposed on the right. The existing condition, it's important to even just define the floors. There's what we call the ground floor, which is at grade at A.J. Griffin Place, which is here. and then you're sort of underground, if you will, on the Grand Concourse. So just to explain that, and what we describe as the upper level is the main level. So the ground floor and the main level, just to clarify that, because there's sort of two floors that are approximately at grade. So the ground floor is this kind of lower level floor where today there is a loading dock, and then the interior was primarily parking and truck service for the unloading and sorting of mail. In the proposed plan here, the post office is keeping a portion of it, so we are still going to pull trucks within, and the post office is going to retain this area right here. There was originally a flow where you went through in and out, and instead we're proposing doing the in and out on this side by slightly expanding that opening, keeping this portion for service and some limited parking on this side. And now on this side, we're looking at taking a portion of the loading dock and keeping it as loading and keeping much of the expression of the loading dock, and then taking a portion of it and making it the main lobby entrance to the office spaces above. Young said, as he described the program, was for kind of smaller, almost entrepreneurial offices. We feel there's a real need for that in the Bronx, actually. There's no really good small office spaces for people starting businesses, and we've gotten tremendously good feedback from the community on that point where they feel there's a need for that. So this side would become the office entrance lobby here. Then this portion here, as Young Woo envisions it, we'd like to make it a marketplace. And that marketplace would be 2 stories tall, and it could have different kinds of tenants. With food tenants, we'd like it to cater to local, cultural and food kind of aspirations, maybe a Latin-style market, perhaps some restaurants and cafes, things of that nature. So that market would be here, and it would have entrances at these points here, because at this point you're sort of, if you will, underground. We were very lucky that there were some existing small doorways here and here. So in order to upgrade the egress to the building, through a lot of kind of careful work, we actually figured out how to thread those exactly into the small existing openings that were there, so we didn't have to make new penetrations to the building for the egress doors. If I go to the main floor, which is that floor that is, several steps up from the Grand Concourse on this side, so now you're a story up in the air here on A.J. Griffin Place. So the main floor, this is the existing landmarked lobby. And we're taking great care, I believe, and you will be the judge, of course, that we're actually taking it back much closer to what it was originally. And we have a whole series of proposals to very carefully structure that. A few small modifications, but today it's full of all these different objects and things. Portions of it have been dramatically changed, and we want to bring portions of it back to its original design status. I'll show you details of that. So for example, sections of the walls were removed. These are kind of post office box kind of things. The vestibules were removed. There's some heavy details where revolving doors and other things were put in. We want to take that back and make that more delicate and replace at least one of the vestibules. And from a program point of view, we'd like to activate this terrace, this plinth that surrounds the building here. And that's very important to us. Again, today it's kind of chained off, if you will, at this point and not accessible. There is an accessible entrance here which already exists, so we don't have to do anything for that, which is fortunate. There's kind of an existing ramp over here. It was previous modification. And so we're proposing that this remain the lobby. We'd like to create the second floor of that marketplace, which is connected by some kind of internal stair perhaps here. And then these would be, as we envision it, restaurants and cafes which could spill out onto this terrace, which could be filled with tables and chairs activated. It's directly across from Posters College. There's many young people in the area. There's a tremendous amount of activity. There's a bus stop on this corner. There's a lot of people there, so we'd like to activate that, because today it's kind of closed off and separated from the street. But to do that, hopefully in an appropriate manner. So I'm going to show you details, but we're proposing adding some doors here, not on all the openings, and doing it in a careful way. We are proposing adding a small stair here, because if there are restaurants and cafes here, they may not have any frontage really onto the main street, and so it's already going to be difficult to activate or to use those. In other words, one would have to go kind of all the way around the corner here, and there are a lot of people on this corner here as this bus stop, so we found a way to even use some of the existing stone and fabric that we'll propose to you to make a very small, sensitive staircase entrance up here. So then, from 149th Street, which is the main street, people can directly assess that plinth level. It won't be quite so isolated and separated from the rest. There's other details of the interior. The post office itself will remain here directly off of the lobby in this space, which has been negotiated and coordinated with them. So they'll have a presence in the building. That was very important to Young Woo. They wanted that, they negotiated that, and it's important to the community. This is the proposed second floor, which today is a very tall, kind of two-story space that was formerly used for mail sorting. It's a dramatic space. It was never accessible to the public. We'd like to bring people into it. We are proposing a series of creating smaller, very high-quality offices for entrepreneurs, for professionals, for different groups, but we also, and this is part of Young Woo's vision, and we're working very closely with them, to have some larger spaces in the middle, where there might be meeting spaces, cafes, places where people can get together, kind of communal sorts of spaces. So that's something we're interested in. We're preserving, there is an interior stair here, which is of historic character. We want to keep that. We're keeping the elevators or refurbishing them, keeping stairs. We're adding an additional staircase over here. So then on the penthouse, we're also proposing putting a small partial mezzanine within the interior and set back from the interior of the building. On the penthouse level, what is today described as the penthouse, it exists here. It's set back from the perimeter of the building. And this is kind of interesting. Like, you can see the darker walls. When you're in the building, you can't see those at all. Many years ago, the post office filled that in and made that into lunchrooms and other areas, but through very careful excavation, like we went in and said, we think there's something in these walls. We literally had to do probes. We had to find it. We talked to one of the older gentlemen who worked there for many, many years. And we found kind of the ghost of this courtyard that had previously existed, which today there's virtually no sign of it. And we thought that was an interesting thing. It's not part of the designation, but we thought it would be interesting to expose that, expose the old brick walls. It's part of the nature and character of the story of the building, if you will. There are framed windows there. The windows themselves are gone, but we found the frames in the brick of the windows. And so we wanted to incorporate those into circulation spaces, public spaces, so that it's part of the story of the building, because we think that as we open up the building and make it accessible, we want to tell that story.
Was the courtyard just, was it 1 story or 2 stories? Did it go all the way to the ground floor?
It only went, and it was in that earlier section, which Kaz showed, which I could come back to if you'd like, but it was only through the penthouse, and then it had stepped skylights that actually allowed light to come into the
Okay, so
sort of
the
second
penthouse
floor.
was basically a donut. Is that
Exactly,
correct? Okay.
correct, Chair. Exactly. And so even as a result, we're thinking that we might create some small skylights in that actually might let a little bit of light into these lower levels below. Like, you can see some X's here. So that's actually one of the things that we're proposing. Not in the original configuration, but to have a kind of a memory of that, which we think would be interesting, as well as exposing the brick walls. And then this is the rooftop. So on the A.J. Griffin side, this is the existing bulkhead, which is here. And then today there's sort of a very large cooling tower over in the corner that's existing that provides mechanical services. And those beautiful big windows, and I'll show you in some of the photographs, many of them are kind of filled with ducts, sort of randomly filled in within the arches and wherever was required, as the post office added their own mechanical systems over the years. So the existing conditions has kind of spotty big ducts kind of and vents stuck into those, as well as a big cooling tower, and we'd like to rationalize that and improve on that and actually make it better. So we're proposing removing the vents and the ducts and things from the grand windows, consolidating the mechanical equipment on the roof. I'll show you a roof plan. Moving the cooling tower towards the back. This is the least visible corner at 150th Street and A.J. Griffin Place. And so kind of cleaning up and opening that front part and removing some of this detritus and former kind of mechanical things that we don't think are as respectful to the building as they could be. In addition, we are proposing a rooftop addition, as Young referred to it. We're tucking most of it into the back here, and we're proposing an extension of it out here, and then this portion of it would be an outdoor terrace and covered with a retractable roof, which actually forms a symmetrical building volume that we think reflects the character of the building, as well as we do have 2 small bulkheads coming up for the egress stairs, which will be required by code. And we'll show you details of that, and I even have an axonometric here, which I can refer to in greater detail that might explain the massing more, because we wanted to try to make that very clear in our presentation today. So I'll keep going, there's more to show you, and I'll return to the rooftop.
I'm sorry, I just have a quick question. Just going back to the existing penthouse and the first penthouse floor
Yes.
that you had. So the earlier one, yeah. Okay, so here, the only thing you're changing is you're putting some indents on 2 sides, right? I mean, essentially, the footprint is exactly the same, but for a portion that's facing Grand Concourse on 149th?
Yes, actually, to be more clear, there's really not an indent there either. The line weight isn't as clear as it should be in the plan. We're keeping the continuous line of the
Oh, so it's a
perimeter.
continuous line? Okay.
We're merely increasing, we are proposing increasing the windows there.
Okay, the windows, okay, but otherwise, bulk-wise, it's the same?
Correct.
Okay.
And then this is the rooftop itself, if you will. So this is the existing bulkhead here and that cooling tower that exists. And what we're showing here is this is that extension we've proposed, and this is the mechanical equipment that we've rationalized on the roof. And we're proposing completely covering that with a very simple enclosure of a mechanical enclosure. I have materials and things to show you later, which would be painted metal and zinc. And we'll show you that. So we'd like to rationalize all the mechanical equipment that today is sort of spread all over the building, plugged into the windows, and put all of that in one clear place on the roof and make none of that visible from anywhere in the public street. These are the building elevations. We begin with the west elevation, which is the elevation of the Grand Concourse. So you can see here the existing building and the proposed at the base, and I'll take you into details of that a little bit more. You can see basically the main proposed changes are taking these very tiny punched windows here and creating larger windows, and you'll see in the sightline studies that it's quite set back. Now you can get really far back and you can see the building from some places because the streets are so large that there are very distant views where it's partially visible. We're always careful to show that, but one has to get very far back, and we felt the horizontal lines of that were consistent with the penthouse. And then in addition, we're showing the addition here, which kind of sits up against that back existing bulkhead, which actually goes up to that height already. And we're proposing adding that here along with a screen for the mechanical equipment. And I'll show that more clearly, of course, in elevation. It reads in a certain way, and yet in the perspectives we'll show you what that looks like later. Continuing through the elevations, this is the north elevation, or 150th Street. One could argue that this is one of the most sort of back sides of the building. And basically, we're proposing very few changes. We're just sort of consolidating these openings to make them a little bit larger. Continuing with the east elevation, this is A.J. Griffin Place. This is that loading dock elevation, if you will. So, and from those photos that Cass showed you earlier. And basically, we're proposing, like here's examples where there's sort of these random ducts and things that we're taking out. Here, we're proposing keeping much of the character of the existing loading dock, but making that into the entrance. So there's a kind of an existing kind of industrial canopy. We're proposing actually keeping that canopy and adding some additional cladding to it, keeping the sort of industrial character of it, because that is part of the history and character of the building, and yet modifying it a little bit. We are proposing adding staircases here. So as we added that one staircase on the west side, and we proposed it symmetrically, so there's also access on this side to the plinth, so that it's not isolated and separated from the streets. And we're proposing making some slightly larger openings here and delineating them very precisely. It's important to note that at the ground floor, this is really the main entrance to that marketplace. So these entrances, which might seem like they're sort of smaller storefronts off to the side, in truth, they are actually the main entrance to a huge program component, which fills more than half of this floor, which is the marketplace. So these entrances have perhaps some greater importance than might be obvious. We're also showing, so the existing loading dock would stay on one part because there will be some loading directly off of that. The loading dock is lifted up a little bit, and so we've had discussions with the Department of Transportation. We're proposing extending and lifting a portion of the sidewalk and having staircases and ramps to make sure that that's fully accessible. A.J. Griffin Place has kind of a nice cobblestone character. It actually has a nice kind of interesting looking industrial character. We want to keep that and maintain that, and we think that's a good thing. There are some signage components, which we're going to show you in much greater detail, including on the canopy here, as well as one proposed sign here, which is for the larger project as a whole, in order to tell kind of its bigger story. Now, I don't mean to keep going quickly, but obviously there's a lot of material. The south elevation, this is very important. This is 149th Street, which is one of the most active streets, directly across from Hostos College. So in this existing elevation, the Grand Concourse intersects here, and the ground slopes down quite steeply, so you get up to the main level, as we called it, and then you have the ground level here below. What we're proposing in this case is adding this one staircase here. It works exactly within the geometries of the building. In other words, there's sort of solid components and balustrades. We want to work within the geometries and dimensions of the building only, not modify them. So we worked between the balustrades. We would match the granite of the base with new granite stairs, change the detailing very slightly, the profiles, so they don't exactly mimic the existing ones, but they're very close. We would take the balustrade between, which has those kind of, I'll almost say voluptuous, like they have these very kind of fat curves to them that are actually quite beautiful and kind of simplified modern curves. We would reuse that material on the sides of the stairs, so none of that historic material would go away, but it would actually be used on the sides of the stair dimensions of it, the geometry of it is just perfect for that. And then finally, these are very small windows facing onto this highly active street with many people, and they're tiny windows that just have metal bars on them in the original existing historic condition. They're not particularly friendly to the street, if we may say, but it is the original historic condition, and we're proposing very carefully within the same geometries and patterns of these windows, making larger openings, which would allow visibility into that market below from the main street. And so we're proposing very carefully making these a little bit bigger and a little bit larger. These existing doors, which remain on the sides, we would keep for egress, so we don't have to modify those. This shows just a view if I kind of remove the balustrade, not that we're proposing removing it, but in order to allow you to see how the doors would come down to the ground, and I'm going to show you more detail on that, where we're proposing extending these openings. So we've just, for illustrative purposes, removed the balustrade to allow you to kind of see through it, to see what the relationship would be, where these windows would extend down to the ground, and it would allow access. And this is where that restaurant and terrace would be, facing Hostos College, facing 149th Street, tables and chairs, activating it, and so forth. So, the design components, I'm going to take you through each of the details and blow it up so you can see it a little bit more clearly. The entry and access points, the existing windows, as we describe them, are like this, and there is this base coming across, and we are proposing doing the windows with the doors here and making these, extending these down to the ground like this, and creating doorways within here. And this shows the existing condition here for this terrace that today is inaccessible with these kind of weeds and things growing on it. And we would propose extending, the doorways down in order to allow access directly to that terrace and keep the exact same profiles of the existing aluminum windows and the geometries of it, which follow the original historic geometries.
Would that be for every window, or is it just some?
Going back to this one, we're proposing doing it just for some.
Okay.
And so in some cases, we would keep it exactly as it is. As a matter of fact, we did it every other window, and then we did it on the corners and in the centers. So when we went back and forth, frankly, we originally wanted to do all of them, and then input and feedback from your staff, we reduced it to a certain number that would allow us to keep some of them. And then this shows the idea of the stairway. And so this corner, we wanted to keep the corner of it marked because we had originally contemplated even doing a larger stair, wrapping it around. And as we refined the idea, and of course worked closely with your staff, we felt that we could do it more from this side, and we could take, keep these balustrades, as I said, the existing geometry of it and the dimensions of it. We could take the balustrade between there and reuse the fabric by putting half on each side. And we could find a simple way, because it was quite important to us to make that terrace more accessible and yet keep the material and to try to do it in a way that was sensitive and harmonious to the original base of the building. So working very hard to try to achieve that and to show that to you. Continuing, at the, so if that staircase was here, at the A.J. Griffin Place side, the building at that point is the one place where the plinth does not project beyond the building. So on that one facade only, the base is, coplanar with the building facade itself. And so in this case, we couldn't find a way to extend the staircase down, and we wanted to because otherwise you'd have to kind of walk all the way down that and kind of hit a dead end, if you will, up in the air after coming onto the plinth. And so we did propose adding staircases, two, because we felt the symmetry is important, one on each side, exactly symmetrical. And we proposed adding a staircase. In this case, it would be steel. It would extend out beyond the balustrade. We would keep the stone balustrade beyond and remove just the fabric in between. And because this is a new staircase in addition to the building, we proposed a simple, clean, set of materials, and yet not mimicking the existing materials because it is in addition to the building. So we proposed painted metal and a glass handrail and bringing that down symmetrically on either side. This also shows...
I just have a quick question, just in terms of program. The market is entered at this lower level, but the floor above is also part of the market, right?
Yes, so there's
internal connections as well. I mean, something that's connecting it in some grand way, presumably internally.
Exactly correct. Okay. So there are really, if you will, two main entrances to the market. One is here at this corner to the lower level of the market, and the other is up the original grand staircase and through the historic lobby, which will be as open as possible. And I'm going to show you later, there's even kind of a solid wall, an upper wall at the lobby, which was not original. That used to be an open screen, and we're restoring that into an open screen so you get a sense of the landmark lobby. And then We're contemplating, and frankly it depends on the exact leasing, but a larger opening and grand stair connecting the upper and lower level. Although in truth, we have to see will it be one tenant or two tenants and so forth. Then, and it's a little hard to read on your projector, I'm sorry. These are very precise details, and of course you can see them included within your packages. First of all, within the lobby, today there are these very heavy kind of beams that were added that weren't original, and these kind of revolving doors that weren't original, and they're quite different. I'll show you pictures of that later. But at the central entrance, we're proposing restoring that original kind of beautiful glittering vestibule. It's really a beautiful piece. It has very fine profiles. You can see the details probably more clearly within your package, but it has very fine, beautiful, delicate profiles, and we propose to restore that exactly to its original condition. That's all gone today. It was removed years ago, and we'd like to bring that back. It has individual lights. They're very delicate. We'd like to restore that and bring it back. So today there's like a heavy beam here and kind of a big 70s revolving door. We want to take all that out and restore the original condition and materials. In addition, the main retail entries at the plinth, these were those kind of extensions of the doorway. And all we're proposing here is continuing those same profiles down and bringing them down to the ground and doing it just at every other entrance. The retail entrance to the sidewalk level, we're proposing, that's where I showed you where the larger openings onto 149th Street. We're proposing doing simple storefront glass, not mimicking the historic glass because it is a new opening, just doing a simple, clean storefront with a simple sheet of glass and setting it back all the way to reveal the depth of the wall. And then we're proposing signage elements attached to that, and we'll show you the details of the signage. The signage we're contemplating is only dimensional steel letters. We want to put them on little pins. We want them to be respectful. No big panel signs, no fiberglass, no big internally illuminated signs. This is a commercial project, and so it's very important that signage will be a critical component of the success of the project. We don't believe the project will succeed unless it has appropriate signage, but we'd like to do beautiful signage that's respectful of the building. It's very important to us. Continuing with details, this is that proposed staircase addition. So this shows the steel. We'd like to do fine kind of, if you will, knife edges and expressions of sharp edges with the steel, which we think actually mirrors the kind of industrial character on the backside because there's existing canopies there that have those kind of details, that existing loading dock canopy, and yet it's clearly a new piece with a glass handrail as the way we've shown it. And this is the detail through the staircase, which we'd like to replicate the exact current granite, but I told you the profiles would slightly change. Because we didn't want to make openings into the side, we just proposed a very kind of thin lip, which would have internal lighting for the stair in order to light it and make it welcoming, but using the same materials, the same proportions as the original stair, so that we thought that would be sensitive. And that's the existing balustrade, the historic granite balustrade, that we've removed that piece and just kind of moved it to the sides of the staircase so that we don't lose any of that historic fabric. Continuing, this is that canopy at the back that I was just referring to, and you can see it's quite straightforward, rather industrial in character, but we're kind of okay with that. This is, and you can sort of see it here, it's a little burned out, but that's the kind of cobblestone street, which is actually nice. We think it's kind of cool. And then you have the railway cut at the back. So this is literally that railway cut, but there's kind of a chain link fence there. It's outside of our control in the trees, but there's something pleasant about the trees. Young has always kind of liked this part, and we think there's something interesting. Maybe we'll work with the MTA, try to get them to take down the chain link fence, other things like that. But we think there's something sort of attractive to this backside. So we want to keep the character of the canopy, essentially keep the majority of the structure, and we're proposing adding a kind of a metal plate that marks and differentiates where the new office lobby will be. So this part over here still remains an active loading dock, frankly, and it's very similar to what's there today because some trucks and things will pull up and we have our market and things like that. The post office will service from the interior. But we've kind of added this metal plate here, and we've also extended out the sort of entry level because the loading dock is higher, and we've extended out a portion of that over the sidewalk, and we've had good feedback from DOT, and we're working with them, and it's also going to be accessible with ramps and so forth. So here's more of an elevation of that existing condition. And then here we show keeping the canopy, adding a metal plate to the bottom, proposing some simple dimensional letter signage up above, and the staircase coming down on either side. And then differentiating between this side with the loading entrance and this side with some glass that would be set in.
So the center there, that opening at the ground or subground floor, once you enter, you're entering the offices, which are actually not until you get to the roof. In other words, that you're entering in the center, but you're not actually entering into the market at the center.
I understand your point, and perhaps I can clarify. You're entering into the lobby for the offices at that ground level.
So you're not entering the market.
And then there would be a door to the market in front of you, but the market entrance itself would be on the corner where I showed you earlier. So in other words, there could be an entry from the lobby into the market, but you're really entering into the lobby of the offices.
And the lobby then takes you up to
That's
the
correct.
offices which are
And the
above.
existing elevators are there, and then that takes you up to the second floor mezzanine, the penthouse, and the rooftop. That's correct. And then the ground floor and main level would be the marketplace.
Behind the lobby.
Yes.
I could go back, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
Just go back one slide. Yeah, why did you choose to put the signage on this marquee off-center, where it seems like all your other signage is centered and the building is very symmetrical?
You know, the reason was simple, although we could make it symmetrical, but the office lobby itself is here, and so we added that metal plate below to signify that's where it is. And then this is the loading area. If it were a strong concern, we could look at it, putting it on the center. It's a relatively small point.
What slide you can show with the,
I remember seeing that canopy too, yeah.
Yeah.
But is the title of the new building going to be the Bronx Central Post Office? So if I go to my office, I'm going to be going to the Bronx Central Post Office?
I want to be a little careful. The client hasn't 100% confirmed that, but that's his working title for it, and he likes the idea. So that's why we've illustrated as such. I can't guarantee the project title because he hasn't confirmed it yet, but actually they like the idea of including post office and office within it, and that's their working title. And so far, that's what we're going with.
Okay.
So it's kind of interesting that you even think kind of mimicking and keeping the character of the old post office is a good thing. So that's why we illustrated it as such. So this shows that detail more, where we set the glass back. We can still have the rolling doors come down in front of them, just as they do today. This is the existing canopy, or we may have to refurbish it a little bit to look like what it does, but it looks like it's in decent shape. And then we're proposing simply adding this kind of metal plate, which would be just at the office and retail entry. And then this is at the service bay, where it remains actually in its existing condition. And I have some renderings of this coming up too that will also illustrate the point. And we've tried to show the proportions and the details and so forth. This is where we're proposing extending out the sidewalk a bit. There's a staircase in the middle and an accessible ramp on the side. So for signage, it was really important for us to try to find this right balance, because it is a commercial project and it is set back from the street, and the client very much wants to attract, good commercial tenants, and yet the signage must be sensitive. So briefly, we show a series of different signage types: storefronts, freestanding signs, and some signs on the glass. But overall, there was an approach to kind of identify where the signs go and to sort of set restrictions in place for how big they are, what the materials could be, the kind of signs that would be allowed. So the tenants would have to work within those criteria. And if any tenant tried to go outside that criteria, they'd have to come back and make their own separate application to come back to you. This was our kind of strategy in thinking, because there'll be many different tenants. So then we showed the locations for those, and they're all delineated in the packages now. And our thinking was, rather than kind of sticking signs on the side of the building or the brick where it could damage the masonry or damage the delicate character of the brick itself, that we would always associate it with the storefronts. We would kind of attach metal to metal, if you will, instead of attaching it to brick where it would damage it, and over time, if it gets changed, you would see the remnants of that. So we felt this would be part of our strategy of having a lighter touch. So for example, signage would be kind of on shelves with details, and you can see it located in specific places like here, or you can see it within these spaces here, and we have blow-ups and details that show how that could be done, and we're thinking all of it would be simple dimensional letters in simple materials like stainless steel, which we think is very appropriate to the nature of the building. We also are proposing some freestanding signs at the corners, because it's very important that these signs are quite set back, and so that there are some other signs here, and there are some details that show how those would work. Looking from the east elevation, we already looked at some of these, but we proposed the signage here, and larger signage here, or some components here, or at these entry storefronts here. And then this shows a little more clearly how those dimensional signs could work. And these show some of those details, including limitations relative to dimensions, and dimensions also for the freestanding signs, and even getting into details where there'd be kind of a shelf detail, stainless steel letters, they'd be freestanding, they'd be dimensional. I think they have more of a tectonic nature. Even the nature of these kind of WPA projects, because there are letters and signs kind of incorporated into the stone, we'd like it to be more of a tectonic nature. We don't want signs just to be stuck on. We want to limit the locations, limit the materials, and try to do them in a thoughtful way. This shows those freestanding signage elements and how they could be located. So they act in a way more like blade signs. So here are the signs on the storefronts, but as you go down those terraces. And it was important for us that some of them be pushed out because, again, when you're way out here on the sidewalk, it's hard to look all the way up to these. And we provide very specific details for these. And again, all of our thinking was how can we do it in a sensitive way that's appropriate to the nature of the building, in a more tectonic way, if you will. And these are some of the various details of that show the sizes, the restrictions, the details, and I'm glad to answer any questions you have. The lighting of them, we're thinking would either only be halo lit or front lit. So again, halo lighting meaning like a reverse channel letter that has a plate at the back where you see an indirect light, it's a glow. To me, that's an elegant way to light a building. I've done other projects in front of the commission where we've done lighting like that have been accepted in the past. We want to do it in a careful, restricted way, or front lighting them, which we think would be okay too. So none of these plastic signs or backlit fiberglass signs or things of that nature. Now these show some of the locations, and again, like we've shown them in the bright yellow, and when you actually look at them, as individual signs, they're even less obtrusiveness, but this limits the sizes and areas as to where they could go.
Does this not include the big one at the top?
We're showing the big one at the top in the application, but you're right, we didn't fill in the yellow here for it.
Okay.
The rooftop construction, this is the proposed addition. This is a view of the rooftop. Here's the kind of cooling tower over here. This is the back of the bulkhead over here. The rooftop today has sort of mechanical equipment scattered all over the place. We'd be removing that and consolidating it into the single location that we're proposing. And these show some of the sightline studies, and I'm going to take you through and kind of explain, how they work and what the relationships are in some of the different places. And you can see some of the keys here at the top that show the location of each photograph. So you can see they're from different angles. So for example, this one is looking down the Grand Concourse. This one is at the corner of, gosh, I'm not even sure actually where each of these is. They're keyed into them, but we're showing the effect of the addition on top here, and you can see where each of them is. And I can take you into that in detail. So for example, here, this is the mechanical enclosure on top of it, which goes exactly here. Here you can see a portion of the rooftop addition here. And let me take you through each of those kind of in more detail as we go forward. So the rooftop addition, these are the elevations I showed you earlier, showing how the addition kind of extends up here.
Can you just talk about what the materials are for the parts that aren't brick or glass?
So I brought the materials with me, and the existing brick has a really interesting character. I think it almost has a metallic character. Cass referred to it earlier. It's a gray brick. It's almost silver. And it has kind of an iron spotting, and it's actually heathered slightly, meaning it's not a monolithic brick. It's quite interesting. There's very, very slight variations in this kind of silver iron spotted brick. And so we wanted to create something that would be harmonious with it. And what we're proposing is zinc. To me, zinc is a very classic material. It's a very classic material for rooftops. We don't want to mimic the brick, which I think would be difficult or inappropriate. And yet the zinc is very, very much within the same color palette. So it manages to be, in my opinion, a kind of a classic material that's very similar in tonality and color to the brick, and yet is a different material and a high quality material. So we're proposing zinc for that. We're also proposing simple glass, a very clear glass. It's always hard to show glass, but this is a very clear, high quality IGU unit where we would have glass. For the handrail itself, we would do a laminated glass. Again, a very clear, simple laminated glass, very high quality. And for the signage, so it's a very limited palette, just brushed stainless steel. We're thinking, brushed number 4 stainless steel for the signage itself. So there's steel letters, that it's all within this palette of glass and these kind of gray metallic materials that we feel are complementary and appropriate to the existing silver gray brick.
How much
Yes.
is glass on the upper
So, and maybe now that we're on the rooftop addition, and we brought this because, in clarification, sorry, let's see if I can kind of show it over here. This is the addition, which is kind of L-shaped, if you will. So a portion of it is set all the way back, and really, I would say not visible at all, which is set all the way back up against the existing bulkhead, and the same height, so it's about 17 feet. So it's the same height as the existing bulkhead. And that would have glass facing here, and then a portion of it extends out like this, and that would be glass here, and the glass is set back. And then this portion, which shows this frame, is the retractable roof, and this shows how the volume completes itself in a symmetric fashion, so it is completely symmetrical relative to the building. So this part would be enclosed, And this part has an accordion material with a kind of a canvas polymer material that extends out from here and can come to the edge and cover that and retract depending on the season, whether it's sunny, whether it's raining, and so forth. It's something that can be done simply. So our goal was to create a very simple, clean volume, the same height as the existing bulkhead in the back, and completely symmetrical about the Grand Concourse elevation, because we felt that was important. And then these are the two small bulkheads, which are also symmetrical, and the minimum they could be for the two staircases, which will be required for egress, and egress through the whole building, as well as actually for the rooftop.
Is there any reason why you didn't orient the top floor addition to run along what you already had, which was where the existing penthouse is? So the additional floor, you've oriented in an L-shaped, and then you've created this covered roof area.
Yes, I see your
But
question.
if you turned it around, it would be, what was the word, symmetrical, but it would be nestled behind, and it would be much further away from Grand Concourse.
It would. Well, the whole volume where people would occupy does come out this far, and we do, see this as a restaurant and possibly a beer garden. But to answer your question directly, the best views, and we've gone up there, we feel are very much to the north. There is, and ironically, we would have thought it was to the south to Manhattan, but one can't really see the skyline particularly from there. And to the north, which actually looks towards Yankee Stadium, there's a beautiful park, and there's a variety of different buildings in the buildingscape. And we felt that the view to the north was much more advantageous. The view actually this way, towards the west, has really very little to speak of, so you don't see as much. So we tried to kind of wrap it around to create almost like a kind of a courtyard space, and to extend that terrace out and orienting the view towards the north, which we felt had the best view. So that was the thinking behind it. And the volume itself, by kind of framing that, we felt would then be symmetric. And I'll show you how that works in the view corridors and so forth.
But
Okay, yes.
you lose the portals, right? The circular elements in the existing design on the elevation.
A good
Both
question.
elevations.
There are some very small existing circular windows.
And on the other side, too.
Yes, we wouldn't remove any of them. They would actually go to the interior of the restaurant, and we'd be willing to keep them and a portion of the brick service, and it would actually face, it would become the wall of the interior of the restaurant. In other words, the existing bulkhead beyond, which contains the elevators and the elevator penthouses and mechanical equipment, we don't intend to occupy that. That will remain as mechanical equipment in the elevator penthouse. So we won't penetrate that volume. If we do the addition next to it, we would keep and preserve that brick on the interior of the restaurant, including the round windows.
It's important.
Then these are those elevations, just coming back to it and kind of reminding you of them so that you can see them more completely here. And then these are some of the details of that actually show the more precise details. This includes the penthouse windows, where we would add the windows and extend them here. The existing, the roof extension, but with the mechanical screen, which is shown above here and set back slightly. And the retractable roof, which has that kind of solid beam going around the edge, and then it has this kind of accordion-like fabric that could enclose the whole thing. And then this is a sightline study, which I think maybe will more accurately show how we're contemplating it. So this is a view looking at the corner. So here you have the Grand Concourse, and here you have 149th Street going down. This is the scaffolding that was done. So this is a view of a pipe scaffold that has kind of an existing orange construction tape outlining the top of it. So this is the photographs of the actual condition of the mock-up that was done prior to the hearing. And this shows the addition as it's proposed. So these are the two bulkheads. This is that central area, which is symmetric about the opening when one looks at it at an angle. The symmetry looks a little different. And this is a portion of the mechanical part on the side that you can see up above. This also shows the proposed staircase going up over here. We're using the material and some tables and chairs and umbrellas that could be actually positioned there. This is a view looking towards from A.J. Griffin Place or across A.J. Griffin Place from that kind of overpass. So you can see this is 149th Street here. This is the pipe scaffold here. And actually, in response to the pipe scaffold, we lowered it a little bit. So we actually brought this down to about 9 feet. So this is the mechanical enclosure here that wraps around and here.
How much of that is louvers and how much of that is just flat metal panels?
We actually showed all of it being thin louvers, which is actually shown in here. It's hard to see because it kind of resolves
So-
itself.
so that's
into a
all
solid
louvers?
plane. Yes,
So where does the metal panel start? Can I see any metal panel from this view?
here.
Okay.
So it's 11. It's funny, even when we model it, the louvers kind of resolve into a plane from this distance, but because actually it's modeled that way. This is a view from A.J. Griffin Place. It actually shows the existing condition. And this is how it's proposed, where we keep these entrances here, and I'll show you actually when we bring the loading dock doors down. These are the proposed staircases here. These are the extensions coming out, where we just extended the kind of loading dock outward and kept ramps for accessibility. And then actually at night, the grills would come down, which is actually just like it does today, which would actually protect the loading areas as well as protect the lobbies in those times when it might be closed. And you can see again the existing canopy is here, and then this is that kind of extended plate that comes out, which marks the entrance to the office building here. These are the stairs going up on either side. And this is the lobby, and I'm going to take you through the proposed changes to the lobby now. So this is the existing photo of the original historic condition, looking towards the north side, and this is a similar view of the lobby, but looking towards it's looking towards the east side and looking towards the west side. Here you can see these lights, which have been removed. The beams remain. These kind of wonderful pennant lights remain. These are those vestibules that today are completely gone, and you can see some of the materials and the profiles as we looked, because we'd like to restore one of them. So today, the lobby looks like this. These are the revolving doors. There is a new door here. These are a bunch of kind of kiosks and large elements that are fit within it. This is an existing historic staircase that we're proposing keeping with a kind of a historic metalwork here. These are some big openings in there. There's kind of a tripartite motif that you're going to see in the elevations. And basically, for the proposed, here at the bottom, we're proposing restoring one of the vestibules in the original materials, profiles, and shapes. Restoring the doors here, not the entire vestibule, but to the original doors. There's kind of almost an Art Deco looking door, classical door that has metal with a series of bands. So we're proposing restoring that to its original condition, getting rid of the big kind of 70s revolving door things here. And then the post office would go here, and we want to keep this tripartite motif, keep all these materials, but restore a screen up above, and there's some little details about how the bases work, and I'll show you diagrams of that to try to explain that quite carefully. By the way, there's an existing terrazzo floor. We'd like to keep the terrazzo floor, not touch it. There's some existing electrical outlet openings within it. We believe we can work pretty much mostly within those as much as possible. Penetrations have already been made to the floor. There are no penetrations to the ceiling. We will have to sprinkle it, but actually we think we can do that in a way that's very minimal and sensitive, so I'll try to take you through some of that. So today, unlike, if I take you back to that.
Right, Jake, just in the interest of time, if we can sort of move along the presentation.
Yes, of course. So basically today, this whole part here has been filled in. So this is a solid wall. We don't know if the screen is still behind it, but in the original there was this delicate screen which appears to be a metal screen with no glass, which was opened into the back into the sorting room. So we are looking to completely restore and replace that screen exactly as per the original. We're looking to take all this kind of stuff out and junk. We're looking to remove all the little lights that are kind of salt and pepper throughout here, and we'd like to restore and replace light fixtures that mimic and perfectly replace the original ones that used to be located there. So showing you the elevations, this is what's existing, this is what's proposed. The murals, of course, will be restored and kept exactly where they are. The blank walls here, if we can find the screens behind them, we haven't been able to find them yet, we will use the originals or we will replicate them exactly. So these would be the metal screens, and this would open directly into the marketplace, and then we would include some signage there. And then with these base conditions, in most cases these are already removed, so we would leave those removed so one could go directly into the marketplace. And then everywhere else where there are kind of tripartite motifs, like there's existing marble here and here, we would keep it. Here, for example, it remains in one piece, but it's gone in another, so we would take that one piece out. We propose just to make this piece complete. Here they're removed, make this piece complete. So basically we've tried to just maintain the integrity of each of these components as we go through it. And then this shows you those details again in the interior. This is a view looking back the other way towards the Grand Concourse. Essentially, we want to keep most of that as it is, except we want to remove these big fat bands that are located within here, which were changed. And we'd like to just bring back this and the original doors. And then these are a series of existing bulletin boards and grill covers for the heating. We're going to keep all of that. These are some of the details showing the marble sill conditions at the lobby and the metal screens above and how we like to restore that and bring that back and make that look like the original. This is a view of the north side as well as the south side where there are particular details of these conditions. This is the one with the metal screen that faces into the original historic stair. And so on this side, we're really virtually leaving it alone. And on this side here, we're proposing removing this one marble sill here in order to open that up because otherwise there'd be no access into that storefront there. This is an isometric or a perspective view of the lobby that shows it as it's existing. And this is as it would be proposed where we'd replace that screen and then we would actually remove just these stone sills. So we've highlighted the ones that we would remove in order to do this.
So entry into the market is where? How do you?
So entry into the market would be through all of these openings.
Okay, underneath the screen.
Yes, exactly right. And then the screen allows visibility through into the market also because it's an open light mesh-like element exactly as the original historic one was instead of a big blank wall, which it is today. And, sorry, I'll try to keep it going because I know that we have limited time. Exterior lighting, fire safety, and security strategy. Basically, for exterior lighting, the building was meant to be lit. And the good news is for a historical building, we have this whole base going around the whole thing. So we're just proposing really putting lighting in tight to it. We're working with Burrow Happold, wonderful engineer, and we think we can just wash up and illuminate the whole facade and make it fantastic. Today it's kind of haphazardly lit with a few lights, and we could just do a beautiful scheme. We do have to have some security cameras. We're tucking them in under canopies and entrances, trying to make them very unobtrusive. We're not kind of glomming them onto the brick. We're attaching them to the metal elements and storefront elements where we feel they're more appropriate, and we're trying to make them as minimum as possible. We're trying to use existing penetrations through the terrazzo floor, which we've located them, and so our goal will be to use those because we think that's less obtrusive. We don't want to break into the terrazzo floor. We're looking at doing sprinklers within the lobby. I was a little worried about that at first, but because of these deep beams, we tuck them in between the beams where they're deep into the recesses, as well as restore those beautiful light fixtures here. And we think that actually we can really minimize the impact of sprinklers on the building. And then finally, we also have some locations for exterior lighting and cameras on the bulkhead. And then we have our typical materials that we already took you through, where we're really looking at just doing this beautiful material zinc and some stainless steel for just the accents for the signage. So we think that could be very nice. And then finally, we just have the original drawings here as an appendix at the end, which are in your package, which I don't need to take you through, but we will locate them.
Let me just add one thing. Staff has suggested that I add it. Can you go back to that? Of course, where the post office, the existing main floor plan, we're proposing 2 flagpoles at the entry to the post office on the north side of the main floor. Go back, back to an proposed plan, just so that it's on the record.
We've got to go all the way back.
Up, right here. So just flanking this entry, which will lead directly into the new post office space, we're showing 2 flagpoles, which is a requirement of the Postal Service that they have flagpoles on either side of their entry. So
You mean on the concourse side?
it's actually no, because you can come in through the main postal lobby, but you'll also be able to come in from the plinth in here. So there'll be an entry at that
I see.
storefront at the base of that window. So on these piers, there will be 2 new flagpoles for the Postal Service.
So in conclusion, we've shown you a lot of material. We'd like to answer any questions you have, but we've tried to really work very hard to balance the concerns of creating a very new use for a building that today is not publicly occupied. The vast majority is not accessible to the public. We try to be respectful and thoughtful relative to the community. We've gotten great support from the community, which you'll hear. They've been extremely positive. We had I would have said, unanimous vote from the community board in support of it. I think one person abstained. It was a very large community board meeting. We've gotten wonderful feedback from the borough president, and we've worked very closely with your staff to try to address any concerns because we think it's a special building. We'd like to do something wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Why don't we take questions? Yes,
One more
Adi?
question. Was there ever any consideration of returning what is now aluminum back to steel on the windows?
The windows were replaced only recently, and they were done through SHPO, so we didn't contemplate that because they are actually quite new.
Other questions? Any other? Yes, Michael.
For Abby, perhaps, does the interior designation include the mail facility space?
No.
Or just the concourse?
Just the lobby.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Okay, we may have questions for you a little later. Yes, any speakers on this item? Any speakers?
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Daniel Donovan. I work and I'm representing the Borough President of the Bronx, Ruben Diaz Jr. I will be reading his testimony, which has already been handed. It's submitted in writing. Testimony starts out as the Bronx General Post Office Building, GPO, on the Grand Concourse at East 149th Street fulfilled the potential of one of our most prominent buildings for decades. Its form and function have successfully served our citizens for more than 80 years. The Young Woo proposal for the building will realize an even greater public use of the building, thereby assuring its preservation for the future. In 2013, my office undertook a study of the Lower Grand Concourse area. One of the objectives of the study was to determine the potential reuse for the Bronx General Post Office, located at 558 Grand Concourse and East 149th Street. Our study emphasized the post office as an institution for communication. Once upon a time, it helped sustain the social fabric and served as the center of the community. Today, with changes in technology, the role of the post office has been diminished. However, the building is still an aesthetic and functional beacon that can continue to serve the community's growing needs under a different role. The community of the Lower Grand Concourse in the South Bronx is in need of a cultural anchor with visibility to showcase the new South Bronx. The GPO can serve as this hub, which would reactivate the corner and the surrounding streets. Additionally, it can serve as a bridge between the retail hub at East 149th Street and the Bronx Terminal Market, creating an integrated retail, arts, and cultural district of the Lower Grand Concourse. The program components offered by Young Woo would activate East 149th Street with access to retail in the basement level, significantly improving the utility and profile of the building at a major crossroads and transit transfer point. The ground floor proposal preserves the historic use of the building by retaining postal services, restoring the lobby to its original appearance, and opening the balance of the space to dynamic public use, reinforcing its historic public function. Anthony J. Griffin Place will, for the first time, be utilized as an entry point for the building. Young Woo's proposal for flanking staircases will complement the building's aesthetic and further help access the grand lobby. The staircases will also facilitate access to the wraparound terrace, further enlivening the ambience of the building. Landscaping, retail, vendors, and other amenities would help to attract pedestrian traffic. The design of the second and third floors for office space will provide an in-house constituency for the activities proposed in the lobby and perimeter areas. The roof, penthouse cafe, and event space will reinforce the GPO's nexus as a cultural hub for the Bronx. The borough president, as I'm reading here, it says, I joined the Bronx Community Board number 4 to wholeheartedly support the Young Wu proposal to make appropriate aesthetic changes to the Bronx General Post Office building and the issuance of a certificate of appropriateness.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more speakers? All right, we also received a resolution from Community Board 4 that recommends that Landmarks Preservation Commission approve the application for the proposed modifications. All right, I think this is a really great project. And there was a lot for us to absorb, a lot of different parts, but I just want to say, overall, I think it's really, it's a great project. It's wonderful for Grand Concourse. It's wonderful for the Bronx. It's a great thing for our building as well. And I think the team has been very sensitive to the fact that this is an individual landmark as well as the interior landmark. And I think they've tried generally in their design to respect the fabric and the character of the building. So, and I know that a lot of work has gone into it, so I want to just tell you that I'm very pleased by the overall approach. But I know that I think there are certain elements here that has been proposed that could be modified, would make this building and this entire project overall much better. So let me just get some feedback from other commissioners. And yes?
I echo your comments. I mean, I've known this building for a long time. Was delighted when the murals were landmarked in the lobby. That was a great victory, I thought. I think we all knew that something was in the works for change, and we wanted to landmark that building with everybody's blessing. At the time, it was still occupied and owned by the post office. I really don't have any quarrel with almost any of it, although a few little tweaks might come out. But one issue, and it's really a question, first of all, the height of the new zinc enclosure, I'm just questioning how tall is that, and can it be lowered? And before you even answer that, because maybe it's not relevant to answer it, I've just noted on page 49 and on page 60, there are two different renderings of pretty much the same thing. And one seems almost acceptable to me, the one on page 49, because the horizontality of the original is maintained. But on page 60, the zinc, and this is all a question of rendering, changes the proportional system of the building pretty dramatically. And that is my only real bugaboo. The new stair taking you down where there is a dead end is a little bit of a problem for me, but otherwise that issue is the thing for me. And I'll note that one of the renderings looks good and the other one doesn't look so good. So it may be that you'll say, well, the one on page 49 is the one that's really the one that is most accurate. But I just make that for the record.
All right. Other comments? Yes, Michael.
Okay. I too think this is a fantastic project and that there's been so much care and thought put into it. I also think that the uses that are proposed are really great and could really do, as the Borough President suggests, act as a real fulcrum to the development of this part of the concourse. I think that there are a few things that I would suggest, since this is an individual landmark of great, clearly it would, back in '76 when Bronx wasn't getting as many views as one might hope from the commission, this building was singled out as an individual landmark, and that says a lot to me, and I think that its beauty, its symmetry, its kind of coolness, and the place it occupies kind of on the historic transition from the classical to the Art Deco to the modern. It's a really interesting place. And I think that the things that I'm going to note, I don't think any of them would impede the approvability of the project or its success as a business venture. I think that the visibility of the top floor element is way, way too much. I think that, I understand that it's positioned for views, but if you look at it, it's basically a relatively small room with a very large canopy that's there really for shade. And because of the desire for an armature for shade, we have what is basically a fully visible one-story addition. I think the shade could be accomplished in more creative ways without an architectural element that was quite as visible from the principal facades. I think the egress stairs, which are new, could be studied with staff and either moved back in the building so that they were less visible over the principal facade, and or lowered and made to look a little bit more like rooftop accretions and not like kind of architectural pavilions. I think that that Fred's point about this, the way that the east facade, the service side facade is rendered is critical, and I think that the applicant can work with staff to figure out how to show it so that it's actually an honest representation of what's going to be presented and make it as good as it can be. I am concerned that louvers don't look anything to my eye like metal panels in real life. So I think we should try to look at that and make sure we're happy with it. I think that the signage at the east side should be centered at the lower level, and the canopy as well. And I would also ask the applicant to look at the one door on the southeast corner under the plinth at that where of all the openings, that's the only one I have any difficulty with, because it does pull a particularly solid, heavy part of the building that was meant to be solid and heavy. I'd ask them if they could take a look at that. That's it.
All right, other comments? Yes, Abby.
I also really commend the work that's been done on the project, the fact that there's a willingness to take it on, and what it portends for this part of the Bronx and this part of so the next iteration of this kind of adaptive reuse in the city. So I think it's extraordinary, and unlike some of the other projects, larger projects that have come before us, I actually think it's sort of ready to go. But the two things that I would say is that the windows, their extension down to make them into doors on the plinth, I would say can be all. In other words, they don't need to, for sort of our sake, keep some of those plinths. I think that they're sort of gratuitous and might as well kind of pull the whole thing down at all of the openings. I do think, though, that the stair, the outside stair, sort of attached to the building, is really, I mean, I understand the need to get from that side of the building onto the plinth. I'm just wondering if it can be, if somehow, if you were to go back to anything besides, Michael's comments, since they are important to him, it would be kind of carving those stairs maybe into the body of the plinth itself. Now, I know that means potentially losing some restaurant space, or I don't know. I'm not sure where it would happen, but
I would just also, I mean, I thought that was an intervention, even though it's at the rear, which did give me some pause. I'm not sure it's absolutely necessary, because you can enter at the lower level, the ground floor level, and you can get to the I guess it's the level, main floor level. So I would ask you to reconsider and see if the project can work without it, because it is an obvious sort of appendage at the lower level. However, if, I don't think that is a make or break for me. It's just a question of whether you could reconsider whether you really need those stairs. And I would concur with you. I'm not, I think having the windows brought down to the ground level I don't think that's an issue for me either. I mean, it's a very fascinating thing. This is a very expansive building, and in the overall context of material and transparency, that sort of change at the bottom, I think, is not, I think it takes away from the preservation of the
I'm
fabric.
actually really interested in you described it in your way, in what ornamentation did during this New Deal period, you know. And I don't know, I'm wondering how one would interpret, you know, other pieces in that mode. It's just so particular. And it isn't just sort of minimal. There's something else. You described it as voluptuous, you know, other things. But the sort of restraint that you're showing with your rationalizing stuff might not necessarily be the right approach relative to that very strong kind of ornamentation that was used at that period. You know, it wasn't about kind of proper, you know, restrained, cool, actually. So I would think about that for the stairs as well.
Yes, other comments? Yes, Diana?
Yeah, I agree with Michael and Adi's comments in general. And I think that the stairs are a concern that, you know, there's, well, I see the need, if there's some way to deal with at least one of the sets of stairs in a more, you know, a more graceful fashion, let's call it. And to look at the height of the rooftop accretions and see what we can do with that. But I think that in general, it's very well done, and I also think that the access to the interior is a very important thing. That many of our interior landmarks do not really have access, and to have to have good access to the murals is, I think, a very important feature. And so I'm very happy about that.
Yes.
Well, since I spend a substantial amount of time in that neighborhood, and my favorite bar is within sight distance of the post office, I can't help but comment. I have a great appreciation for adaptive reuse, and I think the project proposed here is absolutely spectacular. I know there are a few things that folks would want to tweak, and that's great. The one thing that bothers me is something I don't think that's been mentioned, which is the big lettered sign at the rooftop level on the rear side of the building, which I think when the building is operating, it's going to sell by reputation and subtlety, and won't really need that lettered sign at the top, which is sort of inappropriate for a building of that you know, immense power sitting there at the top of the crest of that hill. So I would ask that they consider whether that's really necessary. But setting that tiny tweak aside, I really appreciate what it's going to do for that neighborhood, and it will finally invite me into the building I've seen 1,000 times. So I thank them.
Yes. Michael?
I think it's an admirable project. I share the concerns mostly of Commissioner Goldblum having to do with the addition at the top. My major concern about that also is that it's true, the way the louvers are depicted in the rendering, it's very plain. And my fear is that once there is a depth at that louvered area, it's going to be a visual magnet that draws you up there. So I think I'd want to see either, you know, there are no details for that. I'd like to see a sample of it or a detail of it before I could say, yeah, that's fantastic.
It's possible that if they were able to reposition the mass of the top floor addition so that it were closer, like you had suggested, to the bulkhead, that you could just stick all the AC on top of that, and it might be set back, and it might be less visible.
Does the design team want to address any of the various suggestions that we've made right now?
Well, first, we really appreciate the comments so far, and maybe I could touch on a couple of them. And the whole thing has obviously been a challenge for us to find the right balance. Maybe just to touch on the mechanical one. I'm afraid I've got to go back kind of far, so excuse me for scrolling. Well, maybe touching on this a little. We should look at the louvers, because that's something you guys mentioned, and to be honest, I've got to check the real mechanical details, but I believe most of the mechanical equipment is venting up, if you will.
Yeah.
So if that is the case, we could make that a solid material or perhaps more of a mesh than a continuous louver. I have to verify that comment, with my mechanical engineer, but that might give it a more monolithic character to what you're saying, and we'd like to be responsive to the things you're saying, and we appreciate and welcome, the help with that. In terms of the amount of area, we did calculate the amount of mechanical equipment. We did that pretty accurately. Bro Apple's a great engineer. So it does occupy this whole area. We could probably tweak setting it back a little bit, and as I hardly need to explain to the commission, even just a few feet actually changes the whole sightline to it quite a lot. That makes a big impact. So I don't mind at all trying to set it back as much as we can. I have to make sure I have enough room for all the mechanical, because we are taking it out of a lot of the windows and things where it is today, so I have to make sure there's enough room for that.
On that same topic, we saw this past week at school on the Upper East Side. If you look at the sight lines and adjust the height of the wall based on the sight lines, from our vantage point, usually we don't care if it actually comes to the height of the top of the machine. As long as you can't see the machine over it, that achieves the same effect. So you might be able to lower it.
So we'll look at if we can lower it a hair, and we don't mind kind of getting into the, the details of it, as well as some combination of lowering it, to the absolute minimum, or setting it back even a few feet. And I have learned from my own experience, since you guys see it every day, even moving it a foot or two actually changes it quite a lot. It's quite surprising. So we'd have no problem working to maximize that, to minimize the effect and maximize the amount to which it's set back. The other thing, and I was going to mention it because I know it's come up, the same thing is true here. Now, I know there's been some back and forth over the addition, and we're also been looking at this very carefully. And in building the mock-up, we learned things as you studied all day long with computers, but you do the mock-up, and then it's like, there it really is. There's no disguising the mock-up. So we have already been in discussions about setting this back just a little bit more. And in my opinion, when you set it back just a little bit more, many of the commissioners refer to the horizontal lines of the building. Just setting that back a little more actually does have a great impact. Similarly, the comment of the stair towers. I can make the stair towers as minimum as possible. I have to make them functional. It's going to be hard to set them back.
Are those staircases, new staircases that you're introducing, or?
They're it's a bit complex. This one's new,
Okay.
and this one is above the historic one. It's an extension of the historic one, meaning where the historic one stops, we add the new staircase to continue to the roof. But if you look at the plans, it's difficult to set them back further. I could show how, but it affects the ground floor in ways that are difficult to do.
But you might study the height.
Yeah, and I think the height makes a difference. So, basically, as long as I'll just make it the very minimum I can. And in order to be conservative with the commission, we show what we think it's got to be for sure, but I don't have any problem crunching it down, and I could probably get a little bit of height out of that, and I think that would actually make a difference too. So those two moves, if I brought the height down a bit, and if I set this back a bit more, which is something we were already contemplating with the client, I think those two things would address many of your concerns, because we appreciate the help and the input, and we really want to do it right. And we also appreciate all the other very nice things you said.
Right, but can I, and I'm not, I think this project is so overwhelmingly great. It's, if you can't do something, I don't think that's going to necessarily stop my support for the project, but I just wonder about a point that I think I sort of made, and then Michael talked about as well, which is that a lot of the bulk of this, the enlargement on top, is based on what otherwise would be open space, but the choice to cover it. And does it need, in other words, you could have a much more modest enlargement, which would not be visible at all. So it's not even a question of let me try and push it back as much as I can. It just requires reorienting the enlargement.
I could clarify.
And I think the other point is that the outdoor space, I understand the views, but if you're going to have an outdoor space, wouldn't you be able to get the views anyway? Does it absolutely require that enlargement to maximize its views to, I guess it would be the north? And, I think it's something that you may want to study and
If you look at
come back to
the
us.
plan on 27, most of this rectangular space that projects forward is double height space above a kind of grand stair element. Are you sure you really need it to be exactly that way
Right,
in
couldn't
application?
Couldn't it just cut back to that line?
So the way we see the rooftop is because the retractable roof allows it to be used, it's actually not just for shade. It can be, if you, for example, I would reference there's a retractable roof at the beer garden at Italy. Perhaps some of you are familiar with it over in Madison Square. So that space is inhabited and used. It's not strictly just for sunshade. It's actually used, for example, during the winter, when, like during the summer, they open it up when the weather is very nice, but in the winter, it's enclosed and really used as space itself. So, and we do have, you know, it's not a zoning issue. We have plenty of FAR in
Right,
the building.
right.
So it's more that the client likes the idea of creating a dramatic space that can open and close. The community is really excited about it. So just letting you know what the sort of thinking was behind it. So in other words, it's not just like an private sunshade if we could have put umbrellas out there. It's more like it really should be thought of as habitable space that's flexible to be outdoors or indoors. So that's why the addition really is, in a certain sense, this is a way to think
Right.
about
Well,
it.
What is happening in that L?
The L shape, and it's, you know, the interior plans are illustrative because they're not fully worked out. The way we saw it was this is the restaurant space, this is the kitchen, and this we thought of as some kind of a community room and event space. And so it's off of it, and it works in conjunction with the restaurant, so the restaurant could have functions or affairs within there. And the lines are a little confusing. We debated stepping the floor or not, but it's really an event or community space as we envision it, so that's why.
Yeah, you know, I understand the thinking behind taking it down so it's less visible, but I think that on the elevations, if it's less visible and just seems like a little sort of mistake that, you know, that just a teeny bit is visible, is almost worse than something that's a kind of a piece, an actual, you know, crown on this building, which could be many things. I mean, if you go to page 49 for a second, Michael, what do you think about this? Look, 49 is your favorite page, exactly. There you go. So if the whole roof addition piece was that high, and on the other side, you know, it would seem to me to be more in keeping with something about the proportion of the whole thing. I mean, because it's either nothing or it's something.
Or
But
an
to have like
architectural
a little
presence or
bit
something.
slipping through just doesn't, I don't know.
Can we go back to a
Yeah.
floor plan, just to ask a general question? Can you go back to the roof plan? Just to your point,
Yeah.
I'd be just curious, as we're thinking about possible responses to this, understanding the commissioner's thoughts, perhaps not as tall as that extension
The
on that
existing,
bulkhead.
I'm talking.
Right,
Yeah.
but if this were to be sort of more, if this were all to be enclosed, whereas right now, sort of what we're showing is sort of a continuous frame, so you read the exterior, there's certainly a lot of FAR available on this site, so enclosing that space, just to understand sort of your perspective on this, if this were to be sort of more regular in its enclosed space, is that sort of potentially what some or you're suggesting? Just
Yeah, I mean, I think the chair was asking, you know, if it's not enclosed, then why does it even need to be there? Why does it need to be enclosed? I'm saying something else having to do with, you know, what it should be if it's an addition at all. And I figure, you know, there's precedent in the building itself in that one side of it actually has a tall extra piece.
The side
you know?
facing the rail yard.
Yeah.
I think, Adi, you're saying, look, if it is visible enough to really be visible, then it needs to have some architectural form that is, and if it's just barely visible, maybe that doesn't really matter. But once it gets to a certain point, then, you know, that's, I was going to ask on the other issue of the event space that if it is going to be sometimes open and sometimes closed, in effect, that if you could give us an idea just of how many days you kind of think it's going to be one or the other, just to get a sense of what it would be.
I would say, just using the precedent of, for example, that one restaurant in Diergarten that I mentioned, it's about half the time.
Okay. Thank
You know, just to, if I may, listening to all the commissioners, and just to offer this, there are different points of view, and not to try to balance all of them, but if I made a bit of a go at it, if I could. I do think that making this a more pure volume, because the building is rather pure in its volumetrics, that clearly is one of the defining characteristics of the building, and to make it both stronger and more clear and less complex or irregular. Even if this was an outdoor area, if we had some kind of screen-like enclosure that allowed it to be enclosed yet still allow views, and that it read more volumetrically, if we reinforced that kind of volumetric character, even if this was still a flexible indoor-outdoor space, which is the intent, I think that would actually strengthen both the clarity of the reading and some of the points that you made about making a statement. And at the same point, not to try to split all the differences, if I set it back just a little bit more, it would give it more of a horizontal line and proportion, which is something we're contemplating. And those two moves, which may seem contradictory, but to strengthen and clarify the form, but also to somewhat set it back to reduce its impact. And I can't speak exactly for my client, but in some of the conversations we've had, I think that that might actually be a very good balance, and we would benefit from your input and try to achieve those serious goals. I think we could do that, actually. And I think that could be a good thing. I'd want to confer with my client. I don't want to negotiate with you independently. But I think that that could actually achieve both those goals.
Yes.
I may be a lone voice here and therefore not any help at all, but
You're always helpful.
But I just want to say that I actually like seeing something on the roof from the Grand Concourse side. I think it's a little plain without it. I think the adaptive reuse of the building gives it a little more character to see something up there. I think seeing something on the roof is a great thing. And I don't mind exactly what you've done, but I don't also mind what you're suggesting here. My problem is on the other side when it changes the whole proportional system of the rear facade, the side to the train track, I suppose, maybe a less important facade. That's where I'm having trouble, not at the front at all. But it sounds like other commissioners are having trouble with the front.
Right, I think what was, one issue that I had was that somewhere I did think that the symmetry was not really symmetrical because it's an L-shaped building. And in fact, the idea of being more solid,
Sure.
actually, I think would work better.
Yeah, strengthening that corner could help.
So I think that perhaps you
Very
could
open
sort of
to
explore that.
I think we need to keep in mind that the building is at the peak of a crest of a hill. And so you don't really get to see how visible this is when you're looking at the pictures here, because the roads go downward in all directions, so that rear side looks monstrous from the street, from
the train,
that
which I
rear,
see
from that
every
train
day.
side. Because yes, the train tracks are there, but there's a whole neighborhood back there that's way below it that's looking up at it.
It's
And
really
the
a
same
beacon.
thing happens on the opposite side. The neighborhood, set aside the concourse, which may be relatively flat there, both sides, the front and the rear, are looking up like this. So you put bulk on top of that, and it looks massive. Just keep that in mind.
There's no doubt this is a very visible rooftop
Yeah.
addition
Yeah.
as
Right,
these
I
things
agree
go.
with
And I think that given that, I'm not saying that it should be invisible, but I think if it is visible, it should be reinforcing the symmetricality of the building, which is, I think, its key element. It doesn't have to be traditional in shape or in design. I think the suggestion of setting it back and the degree to which you can make it less significant over the principal facade would be good. I'm on the other side of the building, I guess, from Fred. I don't mind the modification to the service side. I think that was meant to be a service side. But I think that if you can set it back and make its expression a symmetrical one, I think it would be better,
Yes,
as well as modifying the stairs.
Yeah, I think that the direction the architect was talking about sounds desirable to me, to try to address some of these issues. And I think he has a good sense of what we're all talking about. I just wanted to say that I do think that the open space, the idea of having the flexible space, I think is a very desirable one for the use, although we don't, moderate use.
It's okay.
I think that's really something I support, so I'd like to see them try to continue to work that in.
Okay.
Can I say?
Yes.
I think we try to be very cautious about line of sight and so on.
Right.
But even though looking at different angle, this is staircase, whatever you do looks not a pure line, right? So I like to see somehow the staircase work it out, including this is very, square box. Right? No in and out so much, but have very clean look square box there. And if you can study somehow from penthouse floor to here, stair is linear or different way you can coming up. So if you can include this, because these two always become isolated because it never lines up clean line. And that's what I can
I understand what you're saying. Somehow, within the form of the addition is to incorporate the two pieces. I think it's sort of moving away from another direction because obviously it means the building's coming more forward.
No, not
And-
necessarily. The client is right. The client's always right. The egress stairs can transfer. They don't have to go rise immediately one above the other. If it transfers in, then it would be within the enclosure.
Right, I think that's fine if in fact what you're saying is that the bulkheads on top actually have to move or be reoriented and then get incorporated into the bulk of the main floor. I think that would be, then it becomes...
Transfer the location. It doesn't have to rise in a complete vertical shaft. You can transfer a little hallway and then go up. It can.
I think it would help to actually rationalize the front facade if they could sort of incorporate that. It's just much more clean line as well. So I think that's something for them to explore. I just want to raise two or three other issues, and I think it's really about coming back and just giving us your thoughts about it. It had to do with, I think, the entrance door, which you said was the southeast corner, and whether it's absolutely, isn't it southeast or southwest corner?
Yeah.
I think we already talked about the material and the bulkhead at the back. We talked about the louvers, and there was also, okay, just on the issue of the sign at the top, and I know that John raised this. I don't think that sign is necessary, and it seems to introduce an element that wasn't historically ever there and is incredibly visible. So I would, ask you to rethink whether you really need that. I think the signage at the ground floor is very tasteful, and but I don't know if you really need it at the rear. I think you see industrial buildings that always have these big signs, but somehow, I don't know, if you have the post office with the signs usually sort of engraved in the stone, and this one just seems, I don't think it's necessary to make this project be a really great, fantastic project. But so maybe you can respond to that also when you come back. Have I missed anything that we want to? Okay.
Commissioners,
Yes.
maybe if I might, I just heard comments about the one stair at the rear. Was that for both sets of stairs, or was it just at East 149?
The two stairs at the rear, I mean, my feeling is if you put one, it's okay to put the other because it's symmetrical. I was just questioning whether you absolutely need it because it's sort of, at one of the views there's some clutter because you're doing a few things. You're introducing these two staircases, you have an existing canopy, then you're putting a lower canopy, which is all fine to sort of mark the entrance of the office portion, I think it is. But one of the views seemed like there's a lot of clutter, and especially since the corner is that the same corner that you were talking about? Okay.
This one here.
Right, so I guess they wouldn't be able to do both, which is a very...
Whatever, and, they hear it, they can come back.
Yeah,
They think it's the right thing.
Yes, that's right, you can respond back and see what sort of works with you. But one other reason why I thought, and it is the rear, and so I'm willing to let it go, it's just that you also create a staircase which has sort of a fabric which is not really a part of the fabric because I think it's like transparent and glass rails. So I thought the other entrance along Grand Concourse was very tastefully and very sensitively done. That intervention is, I think, very well done. So, but why don't you take a look at that, and I think we'd like to hear. Okay? So if there are no other questions or comments, we can close the hearing.